Hey everyone, welcome to the Filmhacker podcast, a show about using creativity, innovation, and technology to growth hack your career and your life as a filmmaker. On today's episode, we're going to talk about how to get jobs that involve travel, how to create jobs or work that involves travel, and of course, how to travel for cheap. In last week's intro episode to the show, I teased doing an episode on using artificial intelligence to automate your accounting. I'm still going to do that episode. I'm really excited about it personally, but I also realize it might not be the most exciting subject to talk about. So first, I'm going to talk about travel hacking as a filmmaker for a couple of reasons. One, I just booked a show that involves a lot of travel, and I'm fortunate to travel quite a bit for work for a few different reasons. Some of them are jobs I get, gigs, and some of it is work that I create myself. And I happen to have a friend who's a younger filmmaker come to town last night, and we were talking, and I mentioned this gig, and he asked me, how do you get work like that? Like, how do you get work that involves international travel? And it's not easy to book. Usually these are gigs, like my work that involves travel has always been in some journalistic field. The first gig I got that involved travel was I was working at CBC in sports, and they sent a bunch of us to Kazakhstan for a couple different Olympic qualifying events. So I was on the team that was doing hockey in Astana, and there was a team in Almaty doing the skiing. So that was a bit of right place, right time. I was working in sports, and sports involves a lot of international coverage. So that did lead to a lot more travel, working at CBC, working in news and sports. So on that front, if you want to travel, step one would be, or one thing to consider would be, choose an industry or platform that inherently involves travel. So that is to say that if you want to travel, if travel is important to you like it is to me, you're going to have to decide if that's more important than, sitting in a cafe and writing your screenplay because you want to do something fiction. I do that, but travel is also super important to me. And so I allow those types of contracts to be a part of my life. And I get to travel about 30% of the year, maybe a little more than that, sometimes on these gigs, sometimes with other stuff that I'm going to talk about in a second. But long story short, one thing you can do if you want to travel for work is choose industries or storytelling platforms or broadcast platforms that involve travel. The next kind of example that I shared with this guy that I can share with you is documentary work. So since leaving CBC, since kind of wrapping up that phase as a mainstream journalist 5 years ago, as I got into longer format storytelling, documentary and fiction, I inherently got into documentary series. And essentially the story of how I transitioned into that was also kind of coincidental and difficult to turn into actionable advice, but I'll give you what I believe are the data points there. When I moved back to my hometown of Montreal from Toronto, because I felt like it was a community that fostered more of the types of storytelling I wanted to do, I identified some key players in the Montreal scene whose work I really respected. And also my network who I developed and people who I wanted to foster relationships with. So one of those people, who are actually two people, essentially they were doing this show that I had seen on CBC, and it was an incredible show. It was about artists all over the world who use their art for social change. And I loved the show, and I found out that they were in Montreal. So I started sending them emails and voicemails and basically just harassing them, letting them know that I love the first season of their show. I'm in Montreal, yada, yada, yada. I'll do anything. That was the pitch. Like, I love your show. I'll do anything. And they never got back to me. In the meantime, I was also working on other gigs. And one of those gigs, I was ADing, assistant directing, and it was a fiction shoot, completely unrelated. But the director, writer, director, producer was someone who I'd met in Cannes a few years earlier. And so I knew he was in Montreal. So he was someone I had on my list of people to foster a relationship with. He was doing the short film. Lo and behold, he happens to know those guys from the other show, the documentary show. They happen to, at some point, be hanging out or at a party or networking event, I have no idea. And they asked him if he happened to have any recommendations for an assistant director. And I happened to have been recommended. So I got a call one day from this random number from this guy who was in Colombia, and he's telling me, hey, my name's whatever, and I got your name from whoever, and I was wondering if you'd be interested in this thing. I told him, I've been interested in this thing for months. I've been trying to tell you how interested I am. And we connected the dots. And that's essentially what led to me getting that gig. So to pull the data out of that, one, what you can do to bolster your chances of getting gigs that involve travel is find the shows that you like, that involve travel, that are produced within your home base or wherever you work out of, and then reach out to those people. Those aren't exactly hacks as much as maybe advice. So let's get to the hacks. One of the ways that I also increase my travel every year is by shooting stock footage. So ultimately, the hack for traveling more as a filmmaker is diversifying your revenue streams to include travel-related activities. Ideally, it also involves filmmaking or shooting, but it doesn't necessarily have to. And that's kind of the idea of this show, is that being a filmmaker, a sustainable, healthy filmmaker, goes beyond what you're creating and involves the life you're creating for yourself as a filmmaker. And so that might mean creating new revenue streams or diversified revenue streams that involve travel. For me, that's shooting stock footage. So at least once a year, I go out somewhere and I shoot stock footage. Now, I am not by trade a camera operator. I have done camera operation enough, some of which has done well. I don't consider myself a DOP or a cinematographer, and that's ultimately why I kind of downplay this and why I don't actively offer it as a service offering, because there are much better cinematographers. So what I mean when I say I shoot stock footage is I go on a trip to a place that I want to visit, and every morning I start with a 4-hour block, a half day, so to speak, where I shoot stuff that ends up on Pod 5, video blocks, Adobe stock. Now, right now, I've gone to, 10 countries shooting stock footage. So far, I have about 200 clips online, and I've probably made a few $100s US. That will continue to increase as clips get resold and as more of the footage finally gets processed. It's just something that I don't have a lot of time to actually do. Once it's shot, you have to edit it, you have to grade it, you have to upload it, you have to add the metadata, all that stuff. But the immediate value is I get to travel, which I enjoy. I create passive revenue, which will continue to develop. Now, the thing to remember with that is to do this, the business must have a reasonable expectation of profit. So stock footage does, definitely in my experience, based on the number of clips I've been able to actually put online and the return that I've seen already with still a backlog of footage. It seems like it's a developing industry, a developing platform, and a reasonable passive revenue kind of development stream that involves travel. I get to travel, which I love. I get to generate passive revenue, which is great. I get to write off the business trip, which is awesome. And also, This creates a lot of social media content, publishing photos of me traveling also helps get other gigs. So I've had a lot of clients who have seen this. Hey, I saw you were surfing in Portugal, or what were you doing in Berlin? This type of stuff, it's like, I think that's the reality of the world. I'm sure we'll talk about social media later and the value of social media as a marketing platform. But if you want to travel for work, you need to look like you're traveling for work. They're not going to hire someone who only has pictures of them working on a laptop in a coffee shop. You fucking kidding me? You have to position yourself and market yourself for the clients that you want to attract. So yeah, so that's one thing you can do, is find a new revenue stream that involves travel. What a lot of Instagrammers are doing, and influencers, I hate that word, but what I do know is a lot of influencers or social media travelers and travel vloggers, a lot of the ways that they create and design this life for themselves, and that I respect for sure, is design the life that they want to live, is they barter their services for room, board, flight accommodations. So that is absolutely something you can do. The reason I'm not particularly attracted to this model is, to be honest, I can make more money if I just work and then I can book my Airbnb and then shoot stock footage to create passive revenue. Or what's great about that is I can set my own hours. I can shoot whatever I want. I can move to wherever I want in that city or country. That flexibility is really nice. From what I've seen, usually these people, they're staying in pretty crummy places or hotels. Like they go where the work is or where they're able to get a free hotel. I'd much rather just work and then choose where I go rather than just go wherever someone is willing to give me a free room, basically. Because let's be honest, Ritz-Carlton isn't, unless Ritz-Carlton is giving the influencers with millions of followers rooms, for sure. But Ritz-Carlton isn't giving rooms for a week to people who shoot a few clips or cut a shitty 30-second video. Like they have a brand to represent. So that's why I'm not huge on that. Prove me wrong or tell me what you're up to, how you're kind of generating revenue or travel hacking your way around the world. That's awesome. I mean, if it's working for you, I'm happy for you. Now, lastly, and this is maybe one of the more important travel hacks, in the sense that this is one that absolutely you have control over, does not require any specific revenue generating model or knowledge of tax systems. And it doesn't require, hoping that someone's going to hire you. What I'm talking about is credit card churning. So, you don't really even have to churn the credit cards. If you like the credit card, you can keep it. But the idea behind credit card churning is that there are a lot of credit cards that offer amazing sign-up bonuses that you can sign up bonuses in terms of points that you can use to travel for between free and very little. This is how I do a lot of my stock footage travel. And it's also a way to minimize the overhead capital investment in this new revenue stream, in this new business model, because essentially most of my flights are covered. Like the last trip I took, I signed up for I think it was a TD Aeroplan card, but it could have been an Amex, could have been American Express. Anyway, the sign-up bonus covered the round trip flight to... That one was Portugal. And I think it was about 60,000 Aeroplan points for the trip. It cost me $72 in taxes and fuel costs. We can get into a little bit more of that, but that's kind of its own episode, this whole credit card churning thing. You should definitely look up credit card churning online if you're interested in this. The other reason is it's going to be fairly geocentric. Different credit cards are offered in different places with different benefits, but I'll give you a couple examples of how this has worked for me. Probably the best example is the American Express Platinum card. First, someone else with the card recommended, and these deals are kind of time sensitive too, so this one's definitely expired. But at the time, that card was offering somewhere between 10 and 15,000 bonus points to both the card holder and the new subscriber as a referral bonus. So he referred me. I signed up for the Amex Platinum card. We both got 10,000 free points, as well as I got what was the sign-up bonus regardless of about 70,000 points. It might have been between 60 and 75,000 points, because I think the total I ended up with was between 70 and 80,000 points. Now, the thing you have to kind of wrap your head around, and the reason most people dismiss these types of credit cards, is because they see that there's an annual fee and they just disregard it because they don't want to pay for a credit card. And I think there are a couple of reasons for that. One, they don't want to pay for something that they associate with debt. That's absolutely understandable. And I definitely don't suggest you get these cards if you're having trouble with debt. But the way I look at it, and the way most travel hackers and credit card churners look at it, you're not paying for the card. You're paying for the sign-up bonus. And you have to do the calculation to make sure that it's worth it. Kind of like Adam Sandler in Punch Drunk Love. If you watch Punch Drunk Love, that'll help you understand. But you're not going to have to run around a supermarket cutting out tops of pudding cups. But you sign up. In this case, the Amex Platinum card, for example, was, I think, $699 to sign up. As I said, I got about 75,000 sign-up points, which actually was a round trip for a flight I took from Montreal to Poland to Ukraine and back. So I got round trip to an area that's called Europe 2. It's an expensive place to fly to. That was, and with points, you can kind of book any time. So that was last minute that I booked. That flight would have cost me almost $2,000. And instead, it cost me 75,000 points, which, even if I had paid the $699 for the Amex Platinum fee, would have saved me $1,400. But on top of that, that card offered a $200 travel credit. On top of that, that was by calendar year, not the year that you have the card. So I got that card in November. Come January, that renewed, did the same thing, got another $200 back. So now we're talking about a last minute round trip flight with multiple destinations in Europe too, for about $300. But it gets better because that card also came with lounge access. So throughout all my travels, whether it was for shows, whether it was for stock footage, whether it was for pure pleasure, I had lounge access everywhere. And you add those up, and like every time you go on a shoot and you're at the airport and you have to spend $20-30 on a meal and a beer, if you travel like I was, like that lounge access paid for itself in in the $300 equivalency that I would have paid on these trips. So that's just one example of how credit card churning can also allow you to live a more comfortable life, achieve the things you want to achieve, such as traveling, if that's important to you. And then there are other perks. And so maybe I'll do a credit card churning episode on its own later, but definitely Google that because that's a great way to basically travel for free or travel for very little. Also, bear in mind, a common mistake that people do is they will book whatever airline they're familiar with. It is very important that you select your airlines very carefully. Air Canada, for example, is the worst. Delta's not, well, I mean, they're awful with service and reliability, but this is the best way to give you the example. Most of my flights with points are with Swiss Air, Austrian Air. There are a couple others that I'm blanking on right now, but they do not charge. This is how it should work, really, because if you're cashing in points for the fee to cover the cost, they only charge for tax and airport fees. So essentially, when you pay with your points, you get the flight, which is how it should be. And you only have to pay for the things that are outside of the carrier's control, like the airport fees or tax. But airlines like Air Canada, unfortunately, fall into this North American system where they really don't honor what should be the agreement when you earn points. Even if you're not travel hacking, when you earn points by using their card and accruing debt and paying them interest, you should have the right to use those points in the way that they suggest, but unfortunately they don't honor that. And so with Air Canada, for example, a lot of people waste their points on Air Canada flights And then they still have to pay, like they'll pay 15,000 points for a flight from Montreal to Toronto return, but then they still have to pay like $120 in fuel surcharges. No, fuel comes with the plane ticket, which you're exchanging points for. It's insane. If you just booked the return flight on its own, it would have been $180. So you're throwing away 15,000 points to save $60. It doesn't make sense. So do the research, look up credit card churning. Let me know if you're interested in talking more about this. I'm definitely not an expert in this field. And even I am saving a lot of money and traveling a lot with it. So you could do it too, but also there are people who are doing it even more effectively with hotel points as well. So that's why it's like, why are you going to trade your services for some dingy hotel when you could just sign up for a credit card and stay at the hotel for free? So that may have been a bit of a ramble. I'm still getting the hang of this, but hopefully you got something out of it. Hopefully, if you are the type of filmmaker who loves traveling, hopefully you'll be able to pull some nuggets out of this and travel more. It's something that's very important to me. I think it's so important, like as a storyteller, as someone who creates characters, as a documentarian, as a journalist, travel is very important to me to grow as a person. And I've always really appreciated George Miller, the director of Mad Max, who I understand he was like an ER doctor before he did Mad Max. And it shows in the way he treats the characters and some of the injuries. I believe that you can't really be a great storyteller without growing as someone who collects stories. So you can type all you want on your laptop at the coffee shop, and imagine things, and that's great and that's cool. But I think the really great storytellers are the Herzogs, the George Millers, the people who have stories to tell or meet people who have stories to tell that challenge their perceptions, that challenge their viewpoints. And just traveling is a lot of fun and adventure. So hopefully if you are a filmmaker who wants to travel more or likes traveling or does travel, hopefully you got something out of this. And until next time, thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to the Filmhacker podcast, a show about using creativity, innovation, and technology to growth hack your career and life as a filmmaker. Until next time, I'm Gavin Seal, and this is the Filmhacker podcast.